Alright, hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk about basically getting set up with Vulkan on macOS and GLFW now that we're at least getting some support for Vulkan on Mac, whether it be through a wrapper or whatever, we'll see. But anyways, when you're going to get set up, there's a few things you're going to need. And so as far as software, you need to have CMake. You can either run it from the command line or the GUI. You're going to need to install the Vulcan Sdk, Xcode. I think you have to have Xcode 9. You need GLFW. I should probably clarify that you're going to need to do this from source when you're setting this up. And then GLM if you're going to do any sort of mathematics, if you want to use GLM, that is. So the steps I'll really be taking here is first install all the software that you need. Make sure you have it on your system. Then you're going to want to set up Vulkan with the environment variables. Then you want to install GLFW from source, create your Xcode project, and then set up Xcode. And so I'll go through all this. So first off, install all the software that you need. So CMake, Vulcan Sdk, Xcode, GLFW source, GLM. These are all easy to find. Lunar Exchange, you can go on and find the SDK right here. GLFW, you can go to the main page and go to the Git, and you're going to want to, you can either clone it or just do the download zip. For GLM, you can go to that page and download that, and then same thing for CMake. All those things are fairly easy to get set up with and started, but you'll need those. So I have gone ahead and created a folder on my desktop. And I already have the GLFW master branch here downloaded and then unzipped, as well as the Vulcan SDK for Mac. And so within this, you already have some documentation that is helpful. So this getting started document and then your documentation. That takes you to this useful page. And so this pretty much tells you how to get set up and set up your environment variables and everything that you need to run some of the applications that come within this. And so doing that, you go through the whole process, and if you do your bash profile, you can export all your path variables and your SDK variables and so forth. And when you go to your terminal, you should be able to run Vulkan info, and it'll tell you all about your system. And of course, it's a super long thing. And you can also run those just straight from here in your applications folder. So if you want to check if it works, you can click on the cube. It's going to tell you that you downloaded it from the internet, so just go ahead and say open. And you'll see that that works. So once you have everything downloaded, go ahead and set up your Vulkan SDK. And so that is with your bin folder. And so keep track of where you put that folder and whether you name it something else or whatnot. And you're going to need to direct everything to this macOS folder. So your dynamic library is going to be in here in some of your bins, or sorry, your executables. And then your framework, if you want to use your framework, your include path if you want to just link straight to the include path, and then as well as your libraries. So once you have that, you're going to want to build GLFW. And so I'm going to be using CMake for that. And so once you open it up, you'll be shown this interface. And then if you want to use it from command line, you can do that as well. But you want to find out where the source is. And so here I have it on my desktop. And GLFW master. And you're always looking for where this CMake list file is. So we see where that is. Where to build the binaries. So I'm going to go ahead and go make a new folder in here. I'll just call this GLFW build. Direct that. Oops. Direct that here. Once you have your directory set up, you just want to press configure, and it'll tell you what compiler you want to use. Usually I just use the default native compilers with Xcode. Once Xcode is installed, that is. So it'll go through and get everything configured and set up. Okay, then you'll be presented with this here. So there's a few things that you're going to want to do. I typically build for the dynamic library, so I have those .dy files in macOS. So I'll click the build shared libraries and not do it statically. Also, when we're building GLFW from source, you can see here that the Vulkan include directory and Vulkan library was not found, and so you're going to have to indicate where you put that. So in my case, I just have it on my desktop. We go to here, macOS. This is the includes, so we can direct it to the include. That's fine. The Vulkan library that we're going to use, you want to follow a similar process. And link to the library. This one here, libvulkan.1.0.69.dylib. That's the one you're probably going to want to use. Put that there. Now there was another step that GLFW said would be a good idea. Was to add a, where was it? No. It was to add a platform variable. When creating it. If I can find it. Okay, so it's the Vulkan guide. Down here, you'll see in macOS, it says because Molten VK is typically not installed system-wide, you will need to point CMake to it using the CMake framework path variable when configuring the GLFW source tree. Set this variable to the Molten VK Mac OS subdirectory, and so forth. You can read that. And so this variable, they say you want to set. Now, I'm not entirely positive that you need to do this, but I did it, and it seemed to work. So name it CMake framework path. It's a path, and that path is going to be the the path to that Molten VK framework. So you can click here. You should see Molten VK, and the framework is right there. Okay? So that's good there. So we now have our new variable in there where we're building the dynamic libraries. Everything else is configured. You've pointed it to the Vulkan include directory. You've pointed it to the Vulkan library. Now I think there was one point where it was saying Doxygen was not found. And so if that is the case, you can just install the dependencies or the missing dependencies. I always use brew. And so if you want to find brew, you can just Google homebrew for Mac. It's a pretty good package manager. But now that we have everything in here set up, we can configure that. Generate. And then go ahead and open our project. And this should automatically open it within Xcode. It'll process your files and make sure everything's good to go. Now once that is finished, you can just build. So I usually press Command B. And this will build your dynamic library in this case, or the static library if you have it building your static files. Now you can go back to the file where you wanted your build to go. Go to your source, debug if you're doing debug, and you'll see here your libraries. And so we have our libglfw 3.3 dynamic library that we can start and point to in our projects. So that's GLFW built from source for our library. Now, at this point, so you've installed all your software. We set up the Vulkan environment variables. You installed GLFW from source. So now we need to basically get everything set up with Xcode. And so here's a previous project that I had put together. If we create new project, or you can just click on Xcode and start your own project. We're going to want to do a MacOS command line tool. Name this whatever you want to name it. C++. Put it wherever you want it to be. Okay. So right now we just have a standard application. And there's a few things we need to do here to get this set up. And so the resource that is in the documentation actually talks you through setting some of these things up. And so it talks about using, down towards the bottom, working with Xcode. And so it tells you how to configure it with your environment variables, setting your variables in Xcode, and then pointing to any frameworks or libraries and so forth. And then a little snippet of code that will help you test whether or not you can actually get an instance running. Now this one, it talked about linking to a framework, but I usually like to just link directly to the include location or the actual library. I don't know, I just like to do that more. So to do that, you click on this project. You're going to want to go to build phases, or I guess we'll set the path for now. So build settings, and we're going to want to update our search paths. And so our header search paths, we need to change this and update this. So we want to point this to our Vulkan header files and our GLFW header files and GLM. So this should all be in desktop right now. And so for Vulkan, point to MacOS, include right there. Oops. I got too many things open here. Put that in there. So that is your Vulcan Sdk include file path. We also want GLFW. Oh, no, it's in the standard folder here. Here. And you'll also want GLM. I think I have this in another file somewhere. Nice thing about GLM is you can just include the entire system. There's no libraries or anything like that. Okay, so that should be all your includes. Now for our libraries. We're going to want to point that to the GLFW library that we created from source. this case it was this debug. Sometimes it's nice to make, of course, your own lib folder, but for this quick demo, I'll just point to the debug file. We also want to point it to our Vulkan library. So Vulkan, MacOS, lib. This is going to be our lib Vulkan 1.0.69, dynamic library in this case. Or I guess, sorry, not the actual library. We're just pointing to the location. So there's your lib. So you have your library directory set up. You have your header search path set up. And so you should be able to run this, and you'll see that it gives you some errors off the start. Or you can at least see if it finds the files. Now that code is in the documentation that it provides in the SDK. So you can go ahead and try to build it. So it says build failed, reference from, and so it is likely not finding, because we haven't included it. So go to your build phases. Of course, you're going to want to actually put those libraries in there. And so link binary with libraries. And you want to point this to the GLFW library as well as the Vulkan library. GLFW build. This is in source debug. You want live there. We also want the Vulkan library from the SDK. It's down towards the bottom right here. Okay, those should be in there. Now if we try to build this, we see that it exceeded, but I don't think it is going to actually work just yet. So it says that the library is not found. Now I don't entirely know what's happening here, but through the setting up of the environment variables in Xcode, you can get it to actually find it. So you're going to want to go up here to your schemes and edit the scheme. And you want to indicate some environment variables. And so here, you want to pass, I think it was, based on the documentation, it tells you there's a few environment variables you want to make. So set variables in Xcode. So in the scheme panel, if I can find where it indicated to make those. Find the layers. Okay, so here's one area where it says to update one of the variables. I think there was more. Oh, yeah, so same thing right here. Add the Vulkan framework. In this case, we're just linking to the library, so we don't actually need that. Alright, so we want to start adding the paths and make these environment variables. So right here, add the environment variable vkicd file names. So add an environment variable, name it that. Our value is going to be that location in the SDK. This was, where was the location? Etc. Vulkan ICD molten ICD.json. So that's the file we want. There's that environment variable set up. We can continue on. And you can see down here it says to add VK layer path variable. Similar kind of process. This is your explicit layers. Just tell them, make sure that's all right. Yep, explicit layers, okay. Layer. So that's the initial environment variable setup, but I think this will still cause a problem because I was running into a weird problem where it wouldn't actually find the library even though I had linked against the library. So we'll see this thing image not found. And so we had to add one more environment variable. I think I saw this in the Vulkan guide. Where was it? Or maybe it was in a search through one of the many Stack Overflows in my hunt to figure out what was going wrong. Anyways, in my previous project here, we can take a look. Wherever is that? So you have to actually tell it where that dynamic library path. Maybe if you indicate this in a system variable, it'll work. But this is essentially just pointing to the actual library location. So you want, we're actually loading a dynamic library, and so we're just saying where does Xcode want to look for that. In this case, we're in our Vulcan Sdk, MacOS, and we're in our lib. That's where we're loading our library, so you can put that there. Go ahead and close. Now, if all is right in the world, this should build, and I think it should build an instance. Yep. So we're creating an instance, and of course right now it's result 0 because we're not really doing anything with it. So at this point, you're essentially set up. So you are linking to GLFW, you are linking against the dynamic library for Vulkan, and you can essentially start to do your Vulkan development now. But we want to actually see something like a triangle. And so there's a Vulkan tutorial page, and if you go down here, we can just jump to the end so that we can at least see something happen. Copy this code. I'm pressing Control A to copy everything, and Control V to paste. Make sure it finds everything. We're also going to need to create our shaders. So you can go to your project directory, create a new folder, call it whatever you want to call it. I'll call it shaders. You're going to need to create new files. Maybe we'll do this in Xcode for now. So within your project, you're going to need to actually copy some files. And we're going to need this to be resources. Don't want to do that. Probably just clear all this. Oh, no. We can drag it in first. Go ahead, we'll add a targets, copy items if needed. Finish that. So now that's in the project. And then we'll need to copy our resources over. So it actually registers all those files that we put in there. Okay, so within shaders, let's make a new file. Let's call this our vertex shader. We'll make a fragment shader. Oops. Let me rename it. Name it whatever you want to name it. Typically with a .vert or .frag. I guess it doesn't matter too much at the time. Now. So we have our standard code here. We're including our shaders. Right now we have it in shaders folder. And so you're going to want to make sure that it's in the right folder when you load your shaders. In this case, this will be uppercase. Also keep in mind that this is not compiled, and our shaders in Vulkan actually need it compiled. And so we can actually go here. Oops. So over there. Sublime. Let's make a new file. We'll save this. We're going to make a shell script so we can actually just compile things easily. We'll call it compile. sh. We'll save this to our project location. Our shaders. We'll save that. Now, if you set up your environment variables correctly, you should be able to call the GLS lang validator from the command line. So GLS lang validator. We'll see. Okay, so that's work. If you type that and it doesn't work, your environment variables aren't set up correctly. So here, GLS lang validator, and the -v indicates you're compiling this for Vulkan, so it puts it into .spirv. We're going to do our fragment shader first, then we'll do our vertex shader. Okay, we see that file's there, but we want to actually make this executable, so you can chmod this with 700. sh. Okay, so compile.sh. Alright, so we can see that it's actually executing, but we don't have any code. So good. Now we can go back to this tutorial, get the shader code. This is our vertex shader. Save that. Fragment shader. in here. Now we'll go back. We'll compile our shaders. Oh, okay, wrong file, and I guess I already have it in my directory here. So, all right, so frag.frag, vert.vert. So it should be good. If we look back, we can see that we have our frag.spv, our vert.spv. So those have been converted into the correct intermediate shader language. So that should be set up correctly. Make sure everything's saved. We can build. Build succeeded. And then run it. You should see your triangle after all that. So that is essentially how to set up your applications and get started with some Vulkan development on macOS and GLFW.